Okay, if you'd all be seated, we'll get started with the symposium. Now that you're all seated, I'm going to ask you to stand and join in a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The chairman of this group tonight, Sue Gallant, is going to have a few opening remarks.
On behalf of the Oxford Board of Selectmen, I welcome our legislators, Senator Richard Moore, Senator Stephen Brewer, Representative Paul Frost, Representative Mark Karen, and Representative Paul Kajowski to tonight's symposium. I also welcome the boards of selectmen and school committees, as well as the government and school administrators from our neighboring communities. Tonight's symposium was suggested to explore ideas to resolve the funding crisis that is plaguing Massachusetts communities and spiking property taxes for our residents. Some towns have forwarded ideas and/or questions in advance, and those submissions are attached to this evening's agenda. Our hope is that by brainstorming this problem, we can all become part of the effort to take control of the financial burdens being placed on our municipalities. Thank you all for coming to explore solutions and to ask questions. Our town moderator, Mr. Frank Morgan, will call all speakers to the podium for their segments on the agenda, after which there will be a question and answer period for the participants of this symposium. Please be advised that this is not a public hearing. Public hearings regarding this topic will be held by the state of Massachusetts in the future. Once again, thank you all for coming, and I'll now turn the floor over to Frank Morgan.
Okay, I've been asked to introduce all the people who are representatives of the town. I'm not going to introduce our legislatures. They will, when they speak, they'll obviously be identified. You probably know them anyway. From the town of Auburn, we have Elizabeth Prouty, who's the chairman of the board. Is she here? Okay. Maybe if you just stand, it'll be good for you, and in case anybody doesn't know you, take a look. Thank you. Dr. Helene from the Auburn Superintendent of Schools. And from the chairman of the school committee in Auburn, Joseph Ferry, I know he's here. Liz Gribbins, and Dorothy Hauber. Thank you. From the town of Charlton, we have Jill Meyer, the administrative assistant. Is Jill here? Okay. Peter Boria, chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Thank you, Peter. And William Trafoni, the finance director. From the school district, I'm sorry. Pretty young-looking crowd out there. From the Dudley Charlton School District, we also have Mr. Gilrine, Sean Gilrine. I know he's here. Sean? We have Kevin Spiewak, the chairman of the Dudley Charlton School Committee. Is he here? Okay. Joanne Powell, the vice chairman. Joanne? Pauline O'Coin. Don't mean to do that. Anthony Batista. Tony? Geraldine Blum, Geraldine Nowicki, thank you, Geraldine, and Kathleen Kabala. Kathleen here. From the town of Douglas, we have Shirley Mozinski, Shirley, Paula Brulette, Richard Preston, and David Furno. I guess Richard and David haven't made it yet. And Michael Gazinski, the executive director. Not here. Town of Leicester, Doug Belanger, the selectman. One of the young guys. Oh, thank you. Lee Zagorski, selectman. Zagorski. And Robert Reed, the administrator. They've got their own little edge over there, I guess. From Millbury, E. Richard Plant, chairman of the board. Mr. Plant. There he is. Thank you. Joseph Coggins, vice chairman. Michael Moore, and Kenneth Scholl. Don't see them. Paul Guida, the town manager. I know he's not here. David Roach, superintendent of schools. Okay. From the town of Oxford, Donald Kaminsky. I should know that one. Donald's the finance director. Jen Casey, the chairman of the board. Jen. Dan Coonan, the vice chairman. Sue Gallant, our sponsor tonight, and Selectman John Sad. Ernie Boss, the superintendent of schools. Ernie. And the Oxford School Committee, Brenda Ennis. Jason Thies, I don't see Jason. Mark Peterson, I don't see Mark. Patricia DeWidsick? DeWidsick is right, isn't it? Yeah. My tongue got a little thick. And Bill Spitz, William Spitz. Thank you all for coming. At this point, we'll call on our Senator Richard Moore.
I'm assuming that the folks sitting in the back thought we might take up a collection, or you wanted to get out fast, one or the other. But first of all, I want to thank Sue Gallant and the Board of Selectmen here in Oxford for hosting this forum and this get-together. Certainly, it's an opportunity to discuss and hear, I think from the legislative standpoint, really to hear from you suggestions that you may have relative to local aid, in addition to more local aid, but as to how we can develop that. One of the things that I think will be helpful is that at Representative Kajowski's suggestion, the Education Committee on which he serves will be holding statewide hearings on Chapter 70, and he's convinced the chairs of the committee to hold at least one of them, if not the first one, here at Oxford High School. So we will have another opportunity in September to actually not only tell us, but to tell the committee that will be formulating the formula or reforms in the formula exactly what you think you'd like to see in the way of that, the changes. We found what happened in 1993 when ed reform was adopted. The formula that was chosen essentially was probably okay at the time as far as being trying to provide a fair allocation among the communities. But as it has developed over the now 12 years, 13 years or so since its adoption, the formula has been less responsive, part of it due to changes in the town, growth in the town. Certainly in multi-town regions and even two-town regions, it has seemed to not work as well and not be as representative. So one of the areas that I expect that the committee will be looking at will be how the formula works for single and multi-community districts, because that does seem to have been out of whack from where the original intention was. The other is that the emphasis of the formula has been on property values as in calculating the wealth of a community, and as many of you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that the community is wealthy. If you have homes or businesses that are worth a lot of money, that doesn't mean the people in those homes are having an easy time paying the bills for them. And so the discussion has been to look at least equal weight, perhaps even greater weight, to income in the community as well, to get an idea of the ability of the community to pay. There are some things that I think the communities can do in preparing for that hearing. One is the point behind investing significant amounts of money from the state in education in particular was to improve the education system. It was ed reform. It was to produce hopefully an accountability on the part of school districts to show that we were actually teaching young people something, and that it was something of value that would help them to go on to college, get a good job, and compete in a world economy. And so, to the degree that communities are showing progress in that regard, I would think that that would be a plus to demonstrate to the committee that, in fact, that investment is paying off. There was an audit done by the state auditor a couple of years ago that suggested that there was not a lot of progress being made in that regard. And so I think to the degree communities can demonstrate that there has been, that the investment is paying off, that would be something the committee would like to hear. Another area of concern from our standpoint in justifying to our constituents, who in so many cases are yours, that I think they tend to be skeptical not only of the state finances but of local finances. examples in the area have been that, for instance, in Southbridge, there's been a considerable debate over a rather sizable deficit in the school department, and then the article in the paper today is they have a surplus. Douglas has a different situation. They just discovered when the superintendent left that they apparently now, when they thought had a surplus, have a deficit. So the local finances probably need to be looked at to be a little more transparent for the voters as well as for us. If we can justify additional aid, we need to justify it based on that, in fact, the aid is doing the job that it was intended to do in the way of education. I'm talking about primarily Chapter 70 right now. And secondly, that the school department is managing those funds well, or for the community is doing it for the school department, that's being done well. It's also, I think, difficult for us to ask other legislators to support our request for additional funding when our communities, many of them in my district, all but of the 14, 10 of them, voted to eliminate the state income tax. If that had happened, we wouldn't be here. There wouldn't be a building operating here tonight. There wouldn't be a lot of things going on tonight. Whether it was sending a message, it was a very dangerous way to do it. And it certainly sent a message that people do not want to pay more taxes. They may want a lot more in services, but they certainly don't want to pay more in taxes. And that's the attitude we're dealing with at the State House and with our colleagues and with others. We also have a governor who believes that whatever we take in that might be more than we pay out should be returned in the way of a reduction in income tax. One of the ads that was on the radio for a while was, we have $1 billion surplus. And somebody asked me, well, when are we going to get the tax cut, now that we have the $1 billion surplus? I contacted the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, and they said, well, technically, we have $1 billion more than we anticipated, but we also started with $800 million less. So we don't have much of a surplus, and then when you start looking at health costs and other costs that are coming along, that's gone. There may be, when we close the books are closed as of June 30th, when we see the final report, there may be some additional revenue, and I hope we do bring that up. I've contacted our Ways and Means Chair and urged her to look at possibly another distribution, such as we did last year. We had a modest surplus, and I think it was around $50 million that was distributed via the lottery formula, although not lottery proceeds, that was able to be of some relief and some help to communities. So if that happens, some communities have contacted me about wanting to have some help in snow removal account, those accounts, because of our rather difficult winter, went well over the amount. What I have prepared for you, and I apologize to the communities that are not in my district that I didn't list you, but then you don't vote for me. And so the communities that are listed here are the ones in the senatorial district that I represent. I know that those of you from Charlton or from other communities, if you have Senator Brewer, I know he probably knows these numbers off the top of his head and could provide that, but I'm sure his office will provide it if you need that. But I wanted to give you some indication that over the time that I've been in the Senate, and Senator Brewer has about the same tenure, that we have been, as we had money, and when we had money, we were, in fact, sending it back in local aid in both Chapter 70 aid as well as lottery aid. And then when the bottom fell out here and in every other state across the country, that's when we started having caps and level funding and all that sort of thing, and cutting the state budget by $3 billion as well. So we now seem to be stabilized. We seem to be back slightly on a slow but modestly increasing revenue picture. And certainly from our perspective, I don't think there's any member of the legislature who doesn't want to say and be able to send more money back to communities. And we are certainly intending to try to do as much of that as we can. I added in this little packet that I have some information on state mandated programs. I hear about state mandates a lot. When I was a selectman, I complained about them too. And we have federal mandates that are imposed on the state. But a lot of these mandates are ones, what would you cut? What would you eliminate if you had that? You know, attendance, I don't think it'd be one you'd want to cut. Even if we cut MCAS, which is always an interesting debate, we still have federal No Child Left Behind mandate, so that's not going to solve us a lot of problems. And in fact, one of the requirements of the ed reform was really to have some kind of a standard way of evaluating the progress of the students. If we didn't have that, we would, might not be called MCAS, but it would be something else. But a number of the mandates that we have, if they are ones that I think most people would be reluctant to take off, I would be happy to offer any community that I serve, if you want to bring one of those up at a town meeting and ask to repeal special education, for instance, and see what kind of a response you get. We made a modification in special ed about 2 years ago, not without a great deal of effort, and it was just a minor modification to try to get it a little more consistent with the federal special ed requirement. Even if we repeal ours, we still have the federal requirement. So we don't necessarily gain a lot of that process, and you have to judge as a community how much of that's worth the battle when there might be other things you could do. But we certainly would be willing to look at that. I would say that if there are, since Proposition 2.5 and the passage of parts of that are in addition to the caps, deals with the issue of mandates. It created a division within the local audit, within the state auditor's office, that if a new mandate comes along or you think it's a mandate and you can request that the auditor's division of local mandates review it, they have on several occasions recommended, and the legislature has funded money when the auditor's office demonstrated a mandate and that it had a particular fiscal impact on each community. Voting issues was one of them that we came up with additional money as a result of that. So if you have a mandate that you want to ask them to review, they are there to do that. And I would encourage communities to take advantage of that rather than simply bemoan that there are mandates that are placed on you. We have the same issue at the state level. We're oftentimes told if we're going to get federal money, we have to do something a certain way. And that's the reality of the game that's played with Washington, and we end up facing it at the state level. But I think from my own perspective, and certainly I would guess from all the legislators who represent this part of the state, that we have a delegation that has been very active in trying to get additional aid, both direct local aid as well as grants and projects for the communities that we collectively serve, and we want to continue to do that, and we hope to work with you to continue to provide that kind of assistance to the community. As we get more money, from my perspective, I think from all of our perspective, we want to share that with our communities because we recognize that the property tax is not the best way to fund a lot of things, and it is a particular burden on elderly and people who don't have a lot of extra revenue coming in because the home values have shot up so much in this area, commercial property basically flat in value, and so the burden of taxation locally has shifted to the homeowner, and that's been an additional source of irritation and probably a lot of the reason behind the inability to get overrides approved because people are, particularly elderly, are concerned about their ability to pay their bills, their tax bill. But with that, I'll leave it to the next group of legislators, and then we certainly want to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moore. Our next speaker will be Senator Stephen Brewer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come down tonight and to listen to you more so than listen to my colleagues over the years because they're my friends and I get to listen to them and they get to listen to me 365 days of the year quite often. I welcome my good friends from Charlton who came down tonight. A summer night when you take the time after many budgets have been put to bed and people kind of take this off of the radar screen and don't focus on it. We, as legislators from January through May at least, on Friday mornings in particular, have what we call eggs and issues. Every Friday morning, we are dealing with a different group that would like to talk to us as a caucus relative to health care or to housing or the environment or education or local aid. And it is extremely helpful, and it is always important that we continue this dialogue. We read the same information and we live the same realities that you do. And I always highly recommend, obviously, the Beacon from Mass Municipal Association. I just so happen to have the one with my picture on the cover. But also, the second, probably one of the most important documents that we are guided by, absent the Ways and Means Committee and the Executive Office of Administration and Finance, is the documents put out by the Mass Taxpayers Foundation. They are sound numbers, they're conservative, they're realistic, and they don't pull any punches. Sometimes they sound like they're Democrats, and sometimes they sound like they're Republicans, which is very important to give us a balance of a perspective. We are emerging, obviously, from some very dark and dreary financial times. If you recall, 18 months ago when we began a process on a budget, the discussion was that it was the worst slowdown in fiscal revenues since World War II. I remember those words, I remember those headlines, and I remember the realities that we were facing. This year, as we finished the fiscal year, with almost $1.1 million higher than we had originally forecast, $1.1 billion higher than we originally forecast, it is a note of optimism. And frankly, the challenges that we face, having more money is always a lot better than dealing with it when you have a lot less. We welcome that. The Senator is indeed correct that the demands on the realities of what we do have for increased revenues are extraordinary. He is humble to the extreme where he does not articulate his help and what he is doing at the systemic cause of the reason that we have a lot of angst about budgets. If you're Joe the plumber, or Frank the electrician, or Sean the school committee chairman, or the school chairman, superintendent, or any teacher or any municipal worker, it is the extraordinary cost of health care, the cost of pharmaceuticals, the cost of providing health care for those who don't have it, from those of us who do, and creating some form of a balance that is causing the extraordinary demands on our resources. Quite honestly, we can't print money fast enough to address that incredible cost. Senator Moore, along with our leader, Senate President Travaglini, obviously has a plan on trying to make more health care affordable to more people, because quite honestly, they're receiving it no matter what happens. They're just going in the emergency room door, and you who pay for health care insurance now are paying for them as well. And their costs are far more acute because they have gone longer without having that kind of care. If we can remediate that by getting people to have preventative care, young people with oral health initiatives, especially in the poorer communities. Those poorer communities are not necessarily just in Boston, Holyoke, Springfield. They're also in rural areas of Massachusetts. I represent 29 towns all the way to the New Hampshire-Vermont border, and I am very aware of those activities. Senator Moore's leadership in this, to get to the root cause of this triple and quadruple the rate of inflation, is the area that we need to be getting at. The good news is they're working on a plan. The governor has a plan. I think the guy who washes my car has a plan, frankly. Everybody does, because we recognize this need. We are the only nation, only industrialized nation on the planet right now that does not have a universal health care plan, quite honestly. We ought to be doing better than that as a nation. But until we do, we have to try to do the best that we can as a Commonwealth as well. The Chapter 70 reforms that the Senator referred to are real. Senate Chairwoman Terry Murray has made it very clear to the Senate President that if one legacy she leaves as the chairperson of Ways and Means is to have reform in Chapter 70. She represents Bourne, which is a Cape Cod town, which has been extraordinarily burdened by the Chapter 70, the education reform law, for 10 full years. Frankly, if I was a legislator from the Cape and the Islands, I would have moved for secession at the Sagamore and Board Bridges 10 years ago. But in addition, she also has Plymouth, which is an extraordinarily high-growth community, and she wants to move on education reform. One of the good news stories is when we reformed the committee structure in the legislature, we took the Education Committee and divided it into two committees, a Committee on Higher Education and a Committee on K through 12. education and early childhood. That, formerly, the Education Committee had 700 bills in front of it in a particular year, a task that frankly was virtually impossible for any hard-working committee and their members to resolve. It is a laser that we are looking at. I served for 8 years on the Commerce and Labor Committee when I was a state rep, and when the captains of business came into our committee to testify on bills, they didn't come in and talking to me about tax cuts. They came in and said, give us an educated and well-skilled workforce, and we will create the products, the goods and the services for this Commonwealth for a thriving economy. And that's our obligation collectively as a Commonwealth to do. We have added on Chapter 70 money this year. We have added on regional school transportation. We have added on payments for in lieu of taxes for state-owned land, special education circuit breaker funding, and any number of other issues. We have more of them. A non-regional school district, Oxford, non-regional school, still is burdened by transportation costs. The Leicester school superintendent was very articulate one breakfast morning where he told me he has 40 special needs students and he has 2,000 public education transportation students. And those 40 special needs students cost more to transport than the 2,000 mainstream school systems. We also know, as a collective society, that if it's our kid that needs special needs, we want the best for them as well. I think we have that obligation morally, and we also have that obligation dictated by the courts for special education funding and resources as well. This fall, we will see legislation coming, we fully expect. The Senate, in our budget, was committed to it. We put $55 million in a particular 8-digit line item account with no hands on it. When you reform Chapter 70, we begin from here with an additional $55 million. The House not wanting to do process in the budget, which is a noble cause, did not want to deal with it in that manner, which is fine. But I do believe, and I think the House members will articulate what the mission is relative to public education and our commitment. It is indeed our number one priority, coupled with health care. We will be back tomorrow overriding the governor's vetoes. He vetoed $110 million out of this budget. Part of it is what we call the pothole account. Until we reform Chapter 70 in that systemic formula, we need to have a reserve account for special needs that come up, that the Commissioner of Education indeed would agree to for communities. At the Ways and Means hearing up in Lowell on education, Commissioner Driscoll was there. An hour and 15 minutes into a give and take from the members of the House and Senate Ways and Means Committee members, we pressed him to finally admit, yes, this Chapter 70 formula, education reform formula, is antiquated and it is broken. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. Are you going to show us a plan? He promised us in 2 weeks. He did get us a conceptual idea in about 4 to 5 weeks. That will take into consideration, as Senator Moore mentioned, property wealth and income wealth in a combination form. We are seeing schools like Andover, where a student that wants to bring a car to school to park will pay a $500 fee. We've seen athletic fees for students extraordinary. I have Oakmont Regional High School, Ashburnham, Westminster. They had a very, very fine football team, about a 7-2 record. I don't think Kajowski was playing for them at the time, but they had a very good football team. And then they went to charging $1,400 per student to play football. You got 2 kids? That's $2,800. That's unacceptable in the word public education. The teams went to 2-7, I believe, immediately one season later. We need to be doing better than that. Again, the Senator mentioned about the promise of the illusions of further tax cuts. Let me give you the reality of that. We are at 5.3% of the income tax now, frozen. That would realize, quite honestly, if you make $50,000 a year and we went to 5.0%, about $100 to $150 a year in your pocket. That won't buy you the Sunday paper. In a net, it would take $500 million out of the state coffers. So don't be fooled when people come and tell you that we can have guns and roses at the same time. It don't work that way, because all that happens is it gets put on your burden for your debt exclusions and your 2.5 overrides that gets only rejected, and then you have something like in Southbridge where 65 teachers get riffed. We need to do better than that. Don't be sold a bill of goods from someone who may be running for president or someone else that has other agendas. The real agenda has to be the people in our communities to make sure that the equity is there. I think that this legislature will stand strong and tall to create better funding mechanisms. We're uncapping the lottery resources that we have. It was a 5-year phase-in. We're going to do it in 4 years. And you're also going to see a discussion this fall of some form of mechanism to get further money for the lottery. I don't know what it is yet. I don't know whether it's gaming. I don't know whether it's just at the tracks. I don't know what it is, it's slots, or whether there's an elaborated form out of the Treasurer's office for some form of lottery expansion to get further money. But we'll be mindful of those things and have that debate as well. But being involved, you communicate with your legislators. We learn more from you. But I will tell you this, from having 29 towns in my district currently, that the problems are not unique to South County. These are problems that are being faced from one end of this Commonwealth to another. The Central Mass Legislative Caucus, consisting of 6 senators and I believe 30 state representatives, stands very strong together, Republicans and Democrats, to do the right thing for central Massachusetts, whether it's on transportation, whether it's on the environment, whether it's on housing, and certainly on local aid and education as well. So by all means, keep those emails coming, those letters coming, those phone calls coming, and we will continue to be mindful and guided by the realities of your experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Our next comment will be from Representative Mark Karen.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight to speak of these important issues, that being finances in our cities and towns. I think the genesis of this meeting, or a meeting to this magnitude, really comes from some time and tolerance that has expired now on where the new education formula is coming. How are we as a city and town going to meet the mandates that the state and we collectively have placed upon ourselves? How do we cut expenses so that we can meet our other obligations if there is no new revenues to be provided? I think, and I will only speak for myself, but there has been some frustration that time has expired on when we're going to hit these bricks and mortar issues statewide. From my observation, we've talked about a lot of things in the legislature of late. Things I never thought we could even think of late. But the bricks and mortar issues have taken a back seat. Well, the time has come to get back to the business of doing business in Massachusetts, providing those core competencies, that being education, public works, infrastructure, jobs. And I think that's where we're here. So we start in on ed reform. I applaud the Senate. I shared it with my colleagues. That $55 million, that pothole account, I would have loved to see in the House. I think kind of maybe take a back seat on our commitment to not doing any policy, knowing that time has expired on providing for our cities and towns in these key areas. It's gotten too expensive. We've got to do something now. Yes, policy must go through deliberations. I don't know if we can wait. Every city and town can wait for that to happen in this course. This was I thought, an admirable proposal, and something that, again, I hope is revisited fairly quickly so that we can have it. That being said, and it was targeted towards districts that were having problems in their performance, I think conceptually we have to make sure that we're not providing vehicles to demotivate people from doing good things. If the only way for school districts to get their hands on additional monies is to show some need, some failure, then I think we're probably doing ourselves a disservice. What are the terms and ties and conditions to this pothole account? I think it's something of a very serious dialogue that we have to undertake. I would suggest that it's a revolving fund, that if you're a system or a town that has a need, that you have access to it, but the terms and conditions on repayment are not foregone unless some extraordinary extra efforts on top of that are made to benefit those who provided it, that being the rest of the Commonwealth. One of the things, too, I find surprising every once in a while when we find ourselves in these, I guess, as the economies will ebb and flow, is have we done everything we can locally and regionally to put ourselves in the best position? I was just happened to be in a discussion. It has to do with planning, and just quickly taking a cursory look at my towns in my district, and to see how many of my towns have actually submitted their Commonwealth capital application to find out where they're scoring. Two of my towns have. Those are things I think we have to stay on top of as local officials, as state officials who oversee, and make sure that we're up on that. That Commonwealth capital score makes us eligible for and places us into consideration for discretionary funding issues. I think if we're looking for money so that we can provide the services that our constituencies are telling us they expect, then we have to make sure we put ourselves in positions to receive the help to provide it. If we don't make the application, if we don't know what our score is, and maybe we don't agree with everything that ranks high on that, but at least we have indicated who we are and what we expect back in the level of partnership from state. I think that's an important piece. And again, coming into this, I want to applaud my Senate colleague, Senator Moore. What I think is may have been light news at one point, and at the very least, just a great press release. The senator put forward a game. You play the state budget. I don't know if anybody's taken the opportunity to click on the internet and actually avail themselves to this, but in a very quick exercise, you find out, geez, just how easy it is to solve this problem. It's not. I'm being facetious. But there are so many constraints, whether it's here at the state side where we're as locals looking for help, at the local side where we're looking for our taxpayers to provide some help, and or in our own household. There is a certain pie of money in revenues. How do we divvy that up? And if the pie is not getting bigger, how do we cut some of our expenses so that we can provide more services? Those are the challenges in front of us. And where Massachusetts is labeled, and I think now it probably carries on because it rhymes, Taxachusetts, statistics don't bear that out any longer. And I think as we move forward, and I don't mention this as a license to do anything different to change our position nationwide, but we rank, depending on the statistics or the source, about 13th in the nation in regards to our burdensome on state and local taxes on our citizenry. 13th in the nation. We are also the fourth least staffed state in the country. So where we think there's a big bureaucracy and everybody's a public servant or a hack, that's not the case. We're fairly stingy. Where we do rank very high in three areas, and again, it's not taxes, but it's the cost of energy, insurance, and property and housing. Three key areas. Now, if we're looking to grow an economy so that we can have more participants in the revenue stream, contributing to the revenue stream, we've got to get through, I think, a couple of those major pieces that keep us from attracting, whether it be manufacturing or service. And talent. If we can't live here, it's hard to work here. So I sit on, and I'd ask and receive placement on the Community Development and Small Business Committee, and also on the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee. And I think there's some things there that will bear out. As Ways and Means and soon the the Committee on Education will be going across the state, listening to people in forums much like we are here today. So too is my Committee on Community Development and Small Business. And what we heard over and over and over again was healthcare insurance and benefits, and how are we to compete, how are we to provide. Because I think there's a real wantingness, at least from employers, to be, number one, a good place to work. And we need to make it affordable so that we can all survive. And what I find disturbing of late in this time of fiscal shortcomings is individuals who enter into the workforce, rightfully so, looking to contribute to pay their own way, and statements say, I couldn't afford to work any longer. And most of that has become single parents, for the most part anyway, those statements come from, because they can't with a meager wage, they can't participate in their companies or their employer's healthcare program. We've got to change that. This is America. A statement that says I can't afford to work has got to be in somebody else's country somewhere along the line, not here. So we accept those challenges. To cut some expenses, I also suggest that the House had an offering a couple of years ago in our budgets, and we have yet to really substantively work on that, is to cut the expense of providing our Prescription Advantage program to our seniors. A worthwhile program, and I don't suggest we shrink its offering, is that I think we can, well, I know we can cut expenses and provide that service to all of them, and hopefully share those savings in areas where we are not as generous or not meeting expectations. The proposal was brought forth by a colleague of mine, John Sybeck, from Hadley, where it was a simple registration for people, our citizens, and making sure that the drug companies, drug manufacturers, make their products available to patients because of their income. They are obligated to do that, manufacturers are, if they are to receive federal subsidies. Well, fine, I'll sign the paper. It doesn't mean I'm going to market that over and over and over again to make sure everybody knows that they can take our product and grab it for free. I'll take the federal money, but I want to kind of reduce my expense, at least from a corporate mindset. But it is their obligation, and I think we as states, recognizing that obligation, make it easy for them to comply. And some of that is an information kind of wholesaling warehouse where these are our most needy and most costly recipients of the healthcare of the senior Prescription Advantage program, is make sure that they're there. We get that information to their prescription carriers, the manufacturer of their prescriptions, and make sure that it comes through, relieving us of that expense that rightfully shouldn't be ours as long as you're eligible here. And it's that type of approach over and over. I would also suggest that we have an obligation in Massachusetts to maybe take a look at our procurement practices. I do believe we outsource. We criticize companies within our borders that outsource. Yet, if you take a look at some of the companies we contract with, just to do simple application and certification renewal and reviews, you'd be surprised. For instance, nurses coming across state lines, coming here from, say, Florida, to get their certification and their approval, is their application, their resume is sent to a review company in Tennessee. I don't know what that does for our economy. They may have been the lowest bidder, but I do know that the residual benefit from people in Massachusetts working is not being recognized. So we're here, I think most of us are here to hear you. I'm tired of hearing myself talk. That happens usually about 8:20 in the morning. But I do believe, and I think the senators have both indicated, that we can create a better economy, a more healthy economy, and I think our quickest and most substantive and stable way is to educate our way to a healthier economy. So we look forward to hearing your comments and taking them forward.
Thank you, Representative Karen. Now we'll have some comments by Representative Paul Frost.
As I was approaching, Senator Moore just announced to everybody that we're going to hear from the dark side now. As the lone Republican here tonight, I'm used to being in the minority, so I'm not shaken too much. But you got a comment? Oh, he cracks me up. All right, I want to thank Oxford first off for putting this together. I know we're all here in the middle of July. I know it's important that we're here, because the number one priority I've always had in my going on 9 years of the legislature, I know the concern of everyone here in their time in the legislature has always been local aid, and trying to get more of it as we can back to our local communities so they can spend it on education, on their roads, their town services, and so on and so forth. I know there are a lot of frustrations, especially after the bad economic times that we had. I know there are frustrations, though I don't know if you want to call them unfunded mandates or not, But for example, when you do get an increase, let's say in Chapter 70, but you see that increase get taken away if you're a community, I know like Auburn, for example, or even Millbury, when you have to see that increase, a good portion of it sent off to a regional school district, vocational school district, because of the way the formula works. Even though you may not even send more students. You might even send less than you did the year before. Because of factors and formulas that are built in. It's not the legislature or the Department of Education who sits there and says, we just think Auburn should pay more, or Millbury or Oxford or anybody else should just pay more. It's built in from the same formula that was put together back in 1993. And therefore, the ability to pay, which I know Senator Moore and Senator Brewer touched on, and thus also taking into the fact of property values, has contributed to that. I know there's a bit of an aggravation sometimes, I know at least from town administrators, about when the minimum requirement for spending on education increases, and yet, you don't get necessarily the local aid to cover that either. So in essence, it's like the government saying, well, you've got to increase what you spend locally, but we're not going to give you as much, proportionately, we're not going to give you as much from the state side to cover that and as well as your other obligations. So I know that's frustrating. And all of us are trying to work together to tackle that. I commend Representative Kujawski for bringing the Education Committee here in September. And I hope the zeal and the vigor and the enthusiasm that you all brought here today, and I'm sure are going to express when we're done, that you come back and you do so in September. Because those people on the committee that will be making recommendations on changing the formula, those individuals from Boston that will be here, I hope that you'll come back. And each and every community that is here, will express their viewpoints and their concerns. So I commend Representative Kujawski and Senator Moore for their efforts on that behalf. I also want to commend Senator Moore as well as Governor Romney, and put them together in the same sentence, for working towards a health care solution. Because obviously health care costs is one of the biggest concerns our communities, our businesses, and everyone faces. And so both of them, I know, are working on plans and proposals that they have put before the legislature to try to tackle those problems. So I commend both gentlemen for their efforts. I do believe that fundamentally we have to tackle the issue of the property values, especially among the communities that I represent, like Auburn, Oxford, Millbury, and Sutton, that income still needs to be a factor. Senator Moore touched on it, the fact that just because you have businesses in your community, just because you have maybe some households or your housing has gone up in assessment value, that doesn't mean that the people who live in them are well off and wealthy and can just keep affording property tax increases. We know that's not true out here in our communities, in the bedroom communities, more or less, if you will, of Greater Boston and 128. We have to recognize, for example, that, again, I'll use the town of Auburn as an example, where I feel Auburn, and soon to be Millbury, I believe it's already started to happen, with their new economic development projects, that they're going to be punished for being economically friendly, because they're creating jobs not only for our region but for the state. They're contributing to the state revenue by sales taxes or other taxes that are collected. They're giving people jobs and health insurance and other benefits. And because the community is open and friendly towards that, the state, in my mind, with the current state of affairs, says, well, that's wonderful, but we're going to punish you for it, even though you got to have extra police and extra fire, though you have to have extra services, your roads take a greater beating, you have to have greater services to handle that increased pressure. So I think that those, has to be looked at as well. And I know, even for communities that say, well, we don't have a lot of economic development, but we want it, well, then you're going to be facing that problem when you get it, Or what I fear the most is some of those communities are going to turn back economic development opportunities because they can say, well, why go through all this when we can get so much from the state anyway, and where we could be punished if we bring in too much economic development, that they're going to say that our ability to pay is increased. So therefore, when it comes to assessments to our regional school district or vocational school district, we have to pay more. And listen, I love Bay Path, I love the Blackstone Valley Tech. They do great jobs. They need the resources to teach our children there as well. But we have to have a much more fair way of doing that when our communities have to pay into that system. I know in the vast budget process, as a member of the minority party, we sponsored several initiatives to try to increase local aid that just, didn't come to be. And perhaps what I'm hoping is that because our budgets were based, the House and Senate budgets were based on a lower revenue estimate figure, that with increased revenues that are expected by many neutral organizations that may be coming in fiscal year 2006, that we will be able to come back and send more money back to you. It is my hope that that will happen, because we will have increased revenues. At least I believe they will. I know the budget was $17.2 billion in revenues. I know many independent groups have had it 17.4, 17.5, and the governor has it somewhat higher than that. But the fact is, you might be dealing with $200 to $300 to $400 million more in revenue. In 2006, I'm not talking about what we have left over from fiscal year 2005, that we should send back to you. And I believe that hopefully we will be able to do that commitment when we realize those revenues. That's my take so far. I mean, obviously I want to take input from you and give my good colleague from Webster the opportunity to say a few words. So thank you very much, and thank you, Oxford, for putting this together.
Thank you, Representative Frost, and last but not least, Representative Paul Kajowski.
Thank you, Frank. I really don't know if it's an advantage to go last. There's one aspect of going last that I did want to point out, seeing the new superintendent of Oxford Schools, Ernie Boss, here. When he was a basketball coach at Oxford High School, he always used to schedule Bartlett last, because he knew Don Cushing would have all the statistics of his basketball team in a report. So thank you, Senator Moore, for being the Don Cushing of the legislature. This is a very great concept, and I wish that the auditorium could have been filled, and I'm basically more interested, though, in listening to you than I'm sure, probably than you are in terms of listening to me. Therefore, in the future, and as it was stated earlier, in September, we are going to, and at the request of myself and Senator Moore, Chairlady Pat Haddad from Somerset of the Education Committee will be chairing a public hearing here so that all of you can testify in all of the problems that you feel exist within the Chapter 70 formula at the present time can be heard and evaluated and put into a plan, actually, that will come up eventually and hopefully remedy some of the problems that do exist. And it's kind of interesting when you do look at the statistics that are provided by Senator Moore, and you must be saying to yourself, why does Webster get more than whatever, or why does Dudley and Charlton get more than Oxford, or why does Southbridge get more than Auburn? And within yourselves and within the school systems, there is no basic reason. I do say this, in the Ed Reform Formula of 1993, when that was voted in, then Chairman of Ways and Means, Tommy Finneran of the House, did not vote on it. He took a walk because he felt like the formula that was being admitted or being voted on or going to be passed was going to break the Commonwealth in years to come. He didn't feel like it was going to be that the Commonwealth could afford what the amount was going to, that what education was going to cost, and he never voted on it, even though he was a major part of the situation, and certainly the author of many budgets that had to supplement and fund this particular bill. And it's interesting with Senator Moore, he in 1993, after it was done, he then took a job in Washington and let me be the scapegoat of some of the problems that existed with that. And now he's back though, and he knew that he's been very, very active in trying to get this fixed. In reality, though, what did the ed reform formula of 1993 try to do? It tried to equalize the school systems of Lawrence and Wellesley. It was done with the idea that the poor communities were going to be, in 7 years, in the year 2000, were going to be equal in terms of education, scoring, and offerings, and that's what the intent of it really was at the time. And it hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. Reality has to exist, and you have to remember that the kids in certain cities they do not go home to the same type of homes and luxuries that some of the kids do in the richer communities, and it's just not going to happen. You're never going to see the scores equalized. But what it does do is it gives every student in Massachusetts an opportunity to succeed, and that's the intent that we have. I've been assigned to the Education Committee, and I'm very proud to say that I attend all the hearings, and I look forward to the hearing that's going to be here in September, because I want to hear what you're going to say, and I want to hear what you feel would be a fix to an ongoing problem. There isn't a community that says that they receive enough of money, and there isn't a system that feels like they do receive enough of funding to take care of the goals that they have. But you know, when you do listen to some of the systems, and you do go to Boston and listen to some of the testimony, well, you know, in Acton, let's say, they testified a few years back, well, we're going to have to cut our gymnastics or our swim team. And you say to yourself, what are those things? They never existed in our area. And luxuries that the drama clubs and all these other activities that were paid for in some of the courses that did exist, those aren't reality in the school systems that are in our district, that's for sure. And you know, one of the things too that we have to remember, and Representative Frost brought up the situation that existed in 1993 when Bay Path and Blackstone Valley Tech and the vocational schools, they were telling all of the school systems that feed their students that we want you to avoid duplication. We want you to cut out some of the life skill programs that you have so we can attract students. Today, they have such a flux of students that go there, they're rejecting those students today, and you do not have those courses in your curriculum where you can offer the lower level students things that they need to be provided for as life skill courses. And that's a major problem. And not everybody has the ability to learn in the same capacity as everyone else, and we know that. As a former classroom teacher, there are some kids that I had in this high school when I taught that no matter how much time you spent with them, they were never going to achieve the levels that other students were going to achieve. Every student is different, and there were some students that could teach the teacher, and that's a reality, and you know that as educators. And you know that the goals in front of us are very difficult, but the goals are all real. We want to make sure that we can provide our communities with the best type of educational systems possible. And how do you do that? And the task is a very difficult task, and it's an awesome task, but it's our responsibility. But it's your responsibility too, and that's why we're holding the hearing here later, so that you can tell the people from all over the Commonwealth, and it's a very diverse group on the committee, both Senator Antonioni and from Leominster and Pat Haddad, the chair from Somerset. We'll have committee members from Marblehead, from the Cape, from all over the state, and you're going to be able to voice your opinions as to exactly what you feel should be done to these formulas. And that's going to be very important. That's actually you having a voice on Beacon Hill, and you should be here. You know, and I'm kind of, frankly, I tell you the truth, I'm kind of shocked that there aren't more people here. People that, you know, that I expected to see at least some of the representatives from the teachers' unions here to listen and be part of it. I expected some of the students, some of the parents who really have a lot at risk, because you're only going to educate your kids once, and this is it. And believe me, reality exists. That these kids have one life, and you can only have one shot at it, and you have to give them the best that you possibly can. And I know that every one of you have the intention of doing so, and we certainly do, but the only way that you can do it is joint, united effort to make sure that it's understood on Beacon Hill that we must do this. And it's not easy for us. It's not easy for us to change it all, because if you think that the representatives from Lawrence and Lowell and New Bedford and Fall River, who get almost 100% funding for their school systems, are going to want to change the formula, you're very much mistaken. They're not going to want to change it. They want that dough to keep coming in. They want everything to be given to them, and you know, the amounts given to them, they're used to these huge payouts that they receive. The city of Boston, you know, Cambridge, it's like, to educate a kid in Cambridge, it's almost $12,000 a student, and they still say it's not enough. You know, what are the answers? Every community is different, every single one, and to change the formula, you really have to be able to count. You have to know your mathematics, you have to know arithmetic. You have to have 81 votes in the House, you have to have 21 votes in the Senate, and you also have to have a governor that's going to do it. And it takes a strong lobbying effort. And I applaud the kids from Oxford. They said that we don't like what's happening to our community, and they went to Beacon Hill. And their voice was heard, and their faces were in the paper. That's the right thing to do. That's how you get things done. And basically, as educators, as leaders, we have to follow their lead, and we have to make sure that that is going to happen. And you know, and tonight's the beginning. Now, when September comes, and we're certainly going to notify each one of the communities as to when the hearing's going to be, I would hope that this place would be filled, and I'd hope that the hearing go on for 6 or 7 hours. Because there's a lot to be told. There are many stories to be told, and there, you know, just some of the things that we've gone over tonight, you know, I've listened to every education hearing, and these, you can't believe, I mean, there are communities, and there are people from communities that come in, and they want to make sure that there's a breakfast program in the schools, because kids do not have the opportunity to eat in their houses. They want to make sure that there are recess programs, because there is no physical education that's being offered, and phys ed being offered, because the kids do not participate in these things at home. Whatever they do in their houses today, I don't know, and you don't know. But they're not doing what they used to. The ball fields aren't filled, the gyms aren't filled, the courts aren't filled. They're not playing the sports like they used to. They're not physically active. And those things are important. And then the obligation of the different health courses and the life school courses, they've come, the breakup in the family is put the responsibility onto the educators and onto you as leaders. And you have to do it. You have to do it, because that's the future that exists for us. And again, I look forward to September, and I look forward to all of you coming here for the hearing. I look forward to some of the questions that we're going to hear tonight, and we'll offer the support. You do have a very powerful group here. These people are the leaders of many Beacon Hill lobbying efforts. Senator Moore, Senator Brewer, you know, Rep. Karen and Rep. Frost and myself. We're very active there. We work very hard, and we're very well known as being aggressive and getting things done. And the Central Mass Caucus has been a very, very positive and supportive force in making sure legislation gets passed. This will be done. There will be a different Chapter 70 formula, or a different school aid formula, whatever it may be called. And as Senator Brewer said, when you have the chairwoman of Ways and Means wanting this to be on her legacy, Mark my words, it will be done in one way or another. The other thing, and you know, Senator Brewer hit on it, where are the revenues going to come from? And, you know, I really, it's no secret, we give $1 billion of Massachusetts money a year to Connecticut, to casinos. I don't know why we do that. I really do not know. And that, a lot of people that, if you dedicate that money, in Florida last year was an 88% to 12% vote to open up slot machines at the racetracks and have the dedicated revenue stream go right to education. And that passed by a huge effort. People are going to gamble, they go to Connecticut, they're going to do it. It's reality. And we should take advantage of those revenues rather than having Connecticut get those revenues. Tourism is huge in Massachusetts. It's part of it. Anyhow, I've talked a little bit longer than I thought I would be, but the one thing that I do, the last issue that I really want to touch on is that we were seriously affected in 2001 after 9/11 with our revenue stream. We had deficits that were staggering, but we were able to handle it better than most states across the nation, simply because of the reserve fund that we had built up within the Massachusetts coffers. And we have to do that again because we are in cycles. They go up and they go down, and you have to prepare for the rainy days as well as you do the good days. And we might be having a few good days coming up, and we hope that we do. However, we have to prepare for the next cycle and make sure that that's going to be taken care of. Thank you.
So that the malady of riding in an airplane for too many hours doesn't get you, I suggest we all take about 1 minute just to stand and hear your knees crack or something, and then we'll get, our next speaker will be Brenda Ennis, the woman of the Oxford School Committee. But let's take a minute and just stretch. And if your neighbor can't get up, help him, will you? Okay, the speakers that are going to be speaking now will be speaking, I believe, from over there. It'll save you climbing up the stairs. Okay, let's be seated and get on with this. Thank you. Would you please be seated so we can get on? Once again, Brenda Ennis, Chairwoman of the Oxford School Committee. Brenda?
Please indulge me as I speak to you first as a parent. Along with raising a happy, loving, well-rounded child, the next priority for my husband and I is she receive an education which allows her to climb the ladder of life. A better school is better learning. Better learning is a better job. This will give her the independence she will need to make her way. Social skills and outside activities is only part of what she should be offered during her educational life of learning. Expecting our students to use outdated textbooks while they walk the halls of million-dollar buildings is absurd. Yet it happens and has been allowed to go on. If basic needs are not met, I often ask, how do our teachers do it? And we all know there are those who are so devoted. Their devotion to our children is unmatched. Now, as I am also a member of the Oxford School Committee, I must, and I do, think of 2,100 plus students and the education they deserve to receive, so they too can climb the ladder of life. Keeping in mind, no two ladders to rise will be identical. Lack of funds are not giving our children fair play. Stepping stones are being snatched from under them. We must insist on recalculation of the obsolete Chapter 70 formula. I believe we can all agree that Chapter 70 formula has crashed and needs to be fixed. Or is part of the solution a broad-based income tax that devotes a percentage to educational funding. I'd like to quote from the State Treasurer's Office website, dated April 12, 2005. During the past 2 years, the state lottery, under the direction of Treasurer Cahill and Executive Director Sullivan, has grown. Revenues, instituting new licensing and professional standards, implemented a market plan designed to attract new players, working with over 7,000 private businesses who sell lottery products. These efforts have led to the most successful year in lottery history, with $912 million returned to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts last fiscal year. The lottery is on pace to exceed this mark this fiscal year. Now, I didn't speak to any of the reps, I did not speak to any of the senators, but something we are on the same wavelength. Is it time to consider a lottery ticket dedicated to funding education? Will that added stability be what we so desperately need? Will that kind of successful endeavor allow the stepping stone of public education to be replaced? As our state senators and our state representatives, we ask that you work with us to find a solution. The needs of the communities here are not that different from one another. We all have our successes and our worries. There are students who excel, but we know there could be more. Unfunded state mandates continually strangle communities like ours. I compare it to being teased by the bully on the playground. Here's the money one year and taken from you the next. But don't forget, you must meet AYP or you'll be on a list of underperforming school districts. Shame on those who believe this is in the best interest of a second grader learning to read, a middle schooler preparing for MCAS, a special ed student trying to keep up with the No Child Left Behind federal mandated law, or the student who tries with all their heart to work at the kitchen table with mom or dad or even their grandmother to learn the words to a great book, or the one who just had their stepping stone snatched from underneath them. Oxford Selectman Susan Gallant, with the support of her fellow selectmen, brought this opportunity to us. And as elected sworn members of town government, our common goal should that be that communications begin and resolution is found. The resolution must be swift. I would ask those within this room, should you go back to your districts and you have those who criticize or ridicule, tell them to get out of your way. You have work to do and enough is enough. Mockery of school committees or elected officials of any kind is not in the best interest of anyone. And as we know, it is self-serving. Like the bully on the playground, they too will be left standing with the other bullies, wondering, where did everyone go? My colleague, Pat DeWitzik, uses an analogy of a pie. As mothers, we would not feed one child and starve another, or love a child more than another. It goes against everything we believe, and it is not the way we would raise our children. To only increase educational spending by 0.2%, the lowest in over a decade, is starving one for another. It is not a fair distribution of funds, and the House Bill H.R. 3010 should be considered an embarrassment to the children who go to school across this Commonwealth. The House bill ignores the increasing cost to states to implement the No Child Left Behind Act, whose programs were cut by $806 million, or 3.3%, bringing total NCLB funding below the FY03. Yet President Bush expects every child to be proficient in 2012. He must think we employ magicians instead of educators. Education funding has hit a concrete wall. Contractual obligations, which include health insurance, will require realistic cooperative negotiations. I ask our superintendents of schools who gather here to contact other superintendents and begin the hardcore press for action from our legislative body. On July 19th, you will all be gathering on Cape Cod. The network you will have access to will be one of great value to all children who rely on public education as their stepping stones. As we here share in the problems, we should unite in the solution. Let Southern Worcester County lead the way. There is no reason on earth why we cannot pioneer this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brenda. Next, the comments will be from the town of Dudley, their town administrator, Jim Whitney, and Jim is a former representative, I remember way back when. He had dark hair then.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I appreciate this forum having been called by the Selectmen of Oxford, participation by the legislators and all who are present. Certainly share the thoughts expressed by Representative Kwiatkowski with regard to the fact that this plays out of the pack. I can tell you that as town moderators, I'm sure Ray Morgan and myself can attest to the fact that we've often had those same thoughts standing in front of the town meeting. In that case, it's somewhat amplified simply because the other people are staying home not to hear others talk, but they're staying home rather than to go actually participate in the decision-making process that directly affects them. It's no wonder that we have less attendance, so I appreciate the fact that we have as much as we're doing. I have two thoughts that I want to pass along, and I particularly really appreciate this forum simply because both of these ideas have been with me for a while, and I simply do not have not had the time to pass them on. They both would require legislation, and in both cases, it's just wonderful to be able to stand here with such a great group of legislators in central Massachusetts to whom I can pass these ideas along and hopefully see some results. First is with regard to the possibility of an add-on to the gasoline tax. The history of my thought with regard to that is based on a terrible accident basically that occurred a good number of years ago on Route 95. A horrific accident with a trailer truck took out several cars, toll gates in Route 95 in Connecticut. As a result of that, then Governor Whitehead decided that toll gates made no sense whatsoever, and at that time, you may recall, every 20 miles or so you had to slow down and pay your tolls, whether you were on Merritt or on 95, and all of those toll routes were removed. The revenue replacement for that, however, came in the form of a gasoline tax, which is fairly sizable. The result is that we, along the Connecticut border, have a very substantial advantage, price-wise, over Connecticut gas stations. As a matter of fact, I happen to notice, and probably could have noticed the same level of disproportionate Connecticut crowds at gas tanks in Dudley. Just recently, when I was filling up my tank at Cumberland Farms in Dudley, I noticed that the 4 cars that fit at the pumps there, I was the only Massachusetts car. All the others were from Connecticut. It seems to me that this might be a very appropriate way for us to get some of that money lost to the Connecticut casinos that Representative Kwiatkowski mentioned by imposing a small tax which would go directly to the municipalities. Now, there's some logic to that, aside from the competitive advantage that we have. And that logic is that With regard to the spiraling municipal financial difficulties, cities have a major advantage in as much as they have more resources from which to gain tax. They have municipal parking lots, they have parking fees, they have hotels, motels, restaurants, all kinds of other opportunities to either have direct fees or the possibility of add-on taxes. Unfortunately, small towns have just about virtually nothing. It would be lawful, obviously, for us to put parking meters or have a parking garage or expect to have a nice hotel in Dublin in which we could excise some tax fees. On the other hand, we in southern Worcester County do have the opportunity to get some tax revenues through an add-on of gasoline. Ironically, I noticed that in a discussion in Southbridge some 6 weeks or a couple of months ago, and I believe it was one of the meetings of concerned parents with regard to the financial difficulties they've had, especially with the school system, and somebody actually mentioned the same idea. So I'm not a sole voice in this. With regard to numbers, it's very difficult to tell what the magnitude of the numbers would be. I tried to find out what that information would be. I just assumed that since the gasoline tax already was paid, the statistics must be available. What we learned, though, through the Department of Revenue is that the tax is paid directly to the state and the distributor, not the individual gas stations. So the result is that the numbers for distributed statewide, or the numbers statewide, for everybody were available, not numbers per town. One of the numbers that I saw, I shouldn't say one of the numbers, but a significant number we saw was some 3 billion gallons a year. And it seems like a lot until you think of the population, and the fact that cars have gotten bigger, and when you consider it, an average of 20 gallons a week is consumed for 50 weeks, that would be 1,000 gallons a year per individual that burns fuel at that rate. If that rate, in fact, if that 3 billion gallon number is in fact correct, just to give some numbers to be able to have some means of putting this into a financial context, that times the 2% rate statewide would provide some $60 million in revenues, which divided by the number of senatorial districts would provide about $1.5 million per senatorial district. We then looked at Senator Moore's numbers using a lottery aid formula. You would basically take the fiscal year 2005 numbers and multiply that times 80%, and that would give you some idea of the magnitude of what this could add up to. The key, I think, would be that any legislation providing for such a tax would clearly have to provide that the tax be paid directly to the municipality and not be paid through the state budget. Thus, we would eliminate the problems that have occurred with lottery money. It's supposed to be direct aid to the municipalities, inasmuch as the money therefore could not be diverted and nor could it be subjected to a formula. As with the other forms of local revenue producing sources, we ought to be local, stay local, and the state involvement really ought to be no more than collecting and paying, unless it could be paid directly without going through the state at all. But in any case, that would have to be accomplished through a state and aid map, and that's something that I would hope would receive some attention, because it certainly, especially along the border towns, would be very helpful and would not hurt our local citizens. The second idea that I wanted to float, which obviously also would need legislative approval. Actually not, so obviously, in my opinion, it's made obviously, notice from the email as a result of input from the courts. That is, it occurred to me that when I had the privilege of spending a lot of time in the court system as a public defense attorney, that oftentimes, whether a criminal case is plea bargained or a decision is rendered by a judge, it's the disposition of the case. Oftentimes, restitution to victims of the crime is ordered by the court or agreed upon by the parties in a plea bargaining situation. In that case, clearly the direct victims of the crime are compensated. However, the indirect victims of the crime are not. Principally, the taxpayers. Taxpayers had nothing to do with the commission of the crime, yet we have to pay for the response to the crime in many cases, the investigation of the crime in all cases, in some cases, even the housing of the criminal defendant, whether it be at a neighboring facility that our town pays for or in our own town facility, and then, of course, the cost of our representation or our assistance with the prosecution in the prosecution of the case. I felt as though it should be within the judicial discretion of the courts to be able to include some of those definable and provable expenses that are borne by the taxpayers and be able to be part of the restitution orders of the courts or restitution agreements in plea bargaining cases. I had our police chief contact the local court to basically float that idea. And the response that I received was that they would hesitate to proceed without enabling legislation. It seemed to me that we would have a huge amount of support for such an effort, probably with the MMA, probably with the Police Chiefs Association, and other law enforcement and tax advocacy groups. That proposal hurts nobody. It certainly would not be ordered by a judge in a case where it made absolutely no sense because, for example, the criminal defendant was indigent. However, in cases where it's appropriate, it ought to be able to be part of the criminal disposition of the criminal case. And so I would like to see us have legislation sponsored by one or more legislators to be able to enable courts to include restitution to local communities as part of the disposition of criminal cases. Those are my two ideas, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jim. We have here comments by the town of Leicester, so whoever would like to address us, please identify yourself once again, please.
Hi, I'm Doug Belanger, a selectman from the town of Leicester.
Thanks, Doug.
Fellow selectman Zagorski is going to follow up with 3 comments afterwards. What I have today is kind of representative of our conversation with the full board. Although the words will be mine, I think they're a consensus or reflective of what our board has felt and as we're going through. I personally went through, I've been selected for 9 years, but went through the 80s on the finance committee and know not only the approximately 2.5 was rolling in, but as revenues were down. And I know as a Commonwealth and as our cities and towns, we can do this, but just cheerleading alone sure won't get it done. I like the idea, and I appreciate Oxford hosting this, somewhat brainstorming and having a conversation on ideas. Our friends in the legislature I work with on a regular basis, and as I sort of testify here today. I'll do as I have for your committees many times. I'll elaborate later to not completely bore us to death, but I'd like to touch a few ideas, and hopefully they stimulate not only our legislators' ability to approach some of our problems, but perhaps our friends in our cities and towns. Often Leicester is kind of boxed in a little bit because our representation and our representative also has the city of Worcester, and that's really, when you're talking about apples and oranges, that's what happens often. It really is a pleasure to work with towns. I don't even have to keep saying cities and towns, quite frankly, so I won't. I have really 4 bullets that I'm going to throw out there. But first, to our friend from the school committee earlier, and certainly we hear from it from our school committee on a regular basis, of course we need more revenue, and in particular, this may be a shock to anybody here from the school committee, but as a parent and a member of the Board of Selectmen, I really don't want to just devastate schools and reduce all of our education for all of our kids. Believe it or not, I want the best for them too. And the hard part is, if we do that, I asked this question in our recent town meeting, if we gave you everything you asked for, everything, don't just ask for a 4 or 5% increase, let's go to 20% increase, that's really what we need. But then again, there'll be no police and we won't plow the roads and so on and so on. So obviously we're in this together, and the more we can realize that, the better off we will be. And so one of the solutions, again, people bring up, well, we need more revenue and stuff. I got to tell you, I've been playing the legislative game for a long time, and I don't see it happening. Sounds great. Other than gambling, which by the way we do every year, we do a budget, so I don't know why the state doesn't let us do it anyway. But the reality is, simply put, if we really look at solving things, when we take all the pie in the sky and all the best dreams in the world, that's not the way we're going to solve this. The way we're going to solve this in the reasonable foreseeable future will be deal with what we know we have, not what we wish we had. And so that comes down to those 4 bullets. Consistency, accountability, allocation, and timing. The consistency comes up a little bit, Senator Brewer talked about it a little earlier, about state special education and that whole problem. Well, in our budget in particular, we could budget 1 year for 5 special ed kids and have 35 come in, and that freaks happen. Or we could budget for 35, the school department could budget for 35, and those of us on the town side would say, you got it because you only got 12. And it's a moving target. So when it comes to that consistency, perhaps in addition to that whole ability to put pay and all of those things, perhaps under consistency we could talk about the state actually taking accountability and taking charge of special education. Now, I don't have the answers to how this can work. This is a brainstorming session, so there's no dumb ideas, so I thought I'd throw it out there. What if the state said, this is, again, out-of-the-box stuff, but we've done in the box for a while and it isn't working. So what about if the state said, okay, never mind it, I'll take Oxford's 15 1 year, but now I own them next year in Leicester, and now I've got them in the middle of the year, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, but I got to change my budget, and then the family moved out or whatever. If the state owned the responsibility, the financial responsibility, straight up to special ed, and we take it off our budget line, we take it off our moving target of imaginary budgets of over budgeting or under budgeting, and it's off the table. One way or another, you're paying us back eventually for special ed. Maybe it'd be cleaner and quite frankly more honest if we just simply said, okay, you got it. And work out the formula. You've been working on the other formula. You can do work on this one. I got faith in you. Accountability. One of the problems from the town side is that lack of involvement since ed reform, that lack of direct involvement. We have a responsibility to involve our taxpayers, but yet, quite frankly, 2/3 of our budget, we don't have any control. When it walks out the door, it's going. You guys out this way more than us in Leicester recently, and have noticed a lot of stuff with it's over budget, no, it's under budget, no, it's surplus, no, it's deficit. I didn't even follow all that other than what I read in the paper, but I know to a minor degree that happens pretty much in all of the cities and towns. So the town needs a little more, if we have the responsibility and the fiscal responsibility to balance our budgets and to be the town leaders, the town fathers, we need some more input in that budget process. And as you look at ed reform, we really do need that. Because if you expect us to run, and the mantra is always, run your town like a business, okay, then let me do a 5-year plan. Whoops, you give me about 5 weeks to do a budget, and you're changing the numbers, and at the same time, I have no direct input or control of 2/3 of my budget. None. It's a bottom line number, it walks out the door. There's no, we don't have that accountability. We don't have the town side of it doesn't have the input in building up a major portion of our total budget. So how do we plan 5 years ahead? The other is the allocation. There's a number of articles, and we forwarded one to you. I'm a union rep for a living, so this goes against the grain, quite frankly, for some in my line of work. But the reality is, when you look at the percentage of administration versus this percentage of direct education to our students, it's something worth looking at. Again, I don't have the answer. There are some 5 or 6 states so far that have passed it. Same for instance, and the numbers can move. 65, 70, 70% of the school budget goes to direct education of our students. Again, we don't have now the ability to do that in a negotiation with the school department in their formation of their budget, but maybe it was part of it reform, whatever that number is, it would certainly say that's what the goal of education is. Let's question maybe some of the other administrative allocations. And then lastly was the timing. Regardless of what you do, to all of my friends up there from the Senate and from the House, ultimately, I want to say, I don't care what the number is, just get it to me sometime before we all go on vacation in July. The idea of waiting and postponing our town meeting, if we have no clue with the best guess of, House 1 is kind of a start. Well, no, then there's a Senate version, and there's a House version, and then, of course, there's a conference committee. Again, we're rolling the dice, we're doing gambling. Let's get that part out, we're doing it again. Even if I were disappointed in the number, at least if we had a real number when we went to town meeting, we could duke it out as we always do and make things work. So those are kind of the 4 summaries. I think they, although again, I'll take credit or blame for the words of the summary, but that is, I think, representative of the concerns and questions and things I wanted to throw out here from the town of Leicester. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Doug. Anyone else from Leicester?
My name is Lee Sikorsky. I'm a rookie selectman. I've been selected for a year now. However, I've been involved with the capital planning committee. I was the original chairperson 7 years ago, and I'm the economic development chairperson for the town. I just have 2 points to bring up, and one that's not a point. It's a fact. Worcester Airport is 3/4 in Leicester, and it would be a great spot for
I get Representative Pizzola right on it. I know.
One of my observations, having served on capital planning, is that it's a great concept, and we put in a pretty effective plan in Leicester, and I emphasize the word plan. And it went well the first 2 years, and then the economy went down for the state. And what has happened is that everything's been continuously being moved back a year. So that this year we had over $2 million in capital funding, of which I believe 300,000 was funded, and next year we have another $2 million. I would like to emphasize my fear, right, what I read in the papers about other towns too, is that our infrastructure is crumbling. And I would suggest that somehow, besides schools, that the state consider funding major capital items, whatever the dollar amount to define capital is, but helping the towns get back, because I have a gut feeling that we're going to be in serious trouble, and with everything that you said about property values and debt exclusions coming to the towns, this is just festering to come bite us in the back. So I would suggest that to you, distinguished people. The second comment, and I didn't even talk to Doug about this, I'm a parent of a special ed student 24 years ago. And back then, I had to educate the special education coordinator about what special ed was all about under Title 766. Well, my suggestion tonight is that, as Senator Brewer said, we have 40 out of 2,000 in Leicester that is more of a cost than the 2,000. Now, if we take the 360 towns and cities in Massachusetts and get that number for, quote, a specialized need, we are, through the current process, decentralizing that. Okay? We are throwing that process out to 360 different special needs coordinators that come up with 360 different special needs approaches, and I'm not, and they're all great. But if you have a process like that, that sounds to me like the process is broken, because you have the same needs. Why not bring it together in one centralized institution, whether it's the state, a new department, and I'm calling that universal special ed. So I would throw that idea out to you, maybe, and I thought of that tonight. I didn't come prepared to speak tonight. So I would throw that out. I think it's a great potential to be coordinated, save costs, get the best education for the kids that need it the most. And those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Selectman Zagowski. At this point, we'll have questions and answers. Questions no one has to answer. If any of the selectmen or anything, I'd like them to come here and to this mic and address the question to whoever they want, or to the representatives and senators generally. If you have a question from down there, just approach over there. We'll try and recognize you. Anyone from my town want to speak? Jen, why don't we start with you and then Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I was a little apprehensive tonight when I came in and noticed that most of my town colleagues in the city of Southbridge were sitting in the general audience, and that the reps and the senators were on the stage. I don't know if you've noticed, but the building is somewhat like the Coliseum, and the floor has some spots up here that actually you can remove, and I was a little apprehensive that there may be lions that were going to come out of the bottom of the floor with the reps and the senators on stage, but so far that hasn't happened. And the reason why I say that, and of course I'm kidding, when we talk about the needs at the local level, we often at our meetings, I don't know what they do in Leicester, but the Board of Selectmen at times, and I'm sure the school committees, become absolutely frustrated beyond recognition at some of those meetings when we're faced with major budget problems and crisis, and our schools need more money and we simply don't have it. And at times our tempers flare, and I think that at times we have all, I know members of our board, we've said things that we don't necessarily mean about our elected reps and senators, but it certainly is illustrative of our frustration and our need for more local aid. So I just want to say that. I know they read the local papers, and I'm sure that they've seen some comments from our board that they haven't been particularly pleased with over the last several months, but we know that they work hard. I have had the opportunity to work in the House of Representatives with Paul Frost in the House reps for a couple summers as a legislative intern, and also in the Senate years back, and I can tell you that these gentlemen on stage work extremely hard, and when they say that the budget process is complicated, it really is. And you have so many different interests up there vying for the same piece of the pie, and it's very difficult. I think they do a good job for Central Mass in bringing home revenues, but we're here tonight because those revenues are not sufficient. And one of the questions that I have, and we had our community prepare for our board some different figures as far as education aid, Chapter 70 aid, and lottery aid over the last 5 years. And one of the things that I've noticed when I look at Oxford's lottery aid, and I I would presume, and maybe incorrectly, that it's probably the same for Dudley, Leicester, Charlton, is that the lottery aid, if we go back to our estimated receipts from 2000, was approximately 1.8 million that the town got from lottery, Beano, and charity games. And if you look to the estimated receipts for fiscal year 2005, that amount is approximately the same. And I think that that is, it's a problem, because if you look at the lottery receipts, you'll see that on the state level they've gone up considerably. One of the questions that I have is why did the cities and towns continue to see a stagnant, if not a decrease in lottery aid? If we look at our lottery aid from estimated receipts from fiscal year 2003, we received 2.1 million. Why does the lottery aid decrease, or why is it stagnant when the state receipts are going through the roof? That's one question I have, because it's my understanding that that money is to go back to the cities and towns instead of being used to balance the state budget. And I know that one of the benefits to living in a heavily Democratic state is that we do have a veto-proof state. And if the emphasis and the commitment is said to be there as far as straightening out the lottery aid to the local cities and towns, then why aren't we seeing it? You've got the votes. Why isn't that money being sent back to the cities and towns? And that's one of my first questions, and not necessarily in a hierarchy of order. And number two, and I'll just leave it to two because I'm sure everybody has several questions, the health care costs, and I think that that's been hit upon tonight, is the major problem with town budgets and with the state budget. What the senators and reps positions are, I spoke to Senator Moore briefly before we commenced this evening about Senator Travellini's proposed legislation, which would allow the cities and towns to directly negotiate with employees with regard to health insurance costs, and trying to get a handle on that. And that's not necessarily the solution, but in reading the legislative intent behind that proposed legislation, it seems like it may be a good start. And lastly, on that same issue of health care costs, I don't know how the elected officials feel about it, but we all know that we are mandated as a town and a community to come up with a certain funding for Chapter 70. We have to match what the state tells us. We have to come up with a certain level of funding. And if we don't do that, then we jeopardize our entire Chapter 70 aid from the state. Is it possible to come up with some type of formula where there would be a mandated state contribution that would at least, de minimis, match what the increase in health care cost is? For example, with Oxford, our increase in education aid went up approximately $204,000 this past fiscal year. However, our health insurance costs for educational employees went up $174,000. So when the comment is made that our children are using antiquated textbooks, that's because you have an increase of approximately $30,000 for the fiscal year. You just can't do it. You just can't keep up. And I don't know how you would fashion that type of mandated matching monies from the state, but if they can mandate that a town provide a certain level of funding for the education, then maybe that's something that they should look into as a minimum, is matching what the increased cost of health insurance is until they get a handle on it. So those are some questions that I have. Thank you.
Would anyone like to respond to that?
I don't want to take away from Senator Brewer, who's a member of the Committee on Ways and Means, the details of that, but the lottery aid has not increased because it was capped in 2002, I believe, with that budget in order to help to sustain the state programs. The lottery receipts, I think it's, if I remember the formula right, 40% of the receipts go back to cities and towns. 15% is available for advertising and administration, and 45% is for prizes. We could reduce the amount of prizes, but then you reduce the revenue if there's not enough interest in getting the prizes. So we've had that debate off and on in the past. We have limited the advertising to some degree, but even then, that reduces the participation. However, the legislature, as soon as the revenue has begun to improve, which was this last year, has begun to phase that cap out over the next, originally 5 years, now 4 years, so that cap will be eliminated in the next few years. And the full amount of the 40% of revenue will come back to the cities and towns. The health cost is not unique to the communities. Every employer and employee and unions, in some cases, are dealing with the high cost of health care. And it's, you don't want to spend as long as I can talk about why that's the case, but we are concerned about the growth, and we are working on, in fact, have developed and working on legislation that will, in fact, I think, at least contain that cost. I'm not going to promise anybody that it'll reduce the cost, but I think we can get the growth of the premiums down into a single digit instead of double digit. That's been the case, but we are working on attempting to do that. The issue that's in the bill, Senate 2042, that was put in at the request of the Municipal Association, is one which gives the communities the ability to negotiate the percentage, primarily the percentage of the employee share. I would suspect that every member of the legislature here has received more than 100 letters, cards, postcards, emails, whatever, from employees not wanting to have that section included in the final bill. There is a policy issue there that I am frankly concerned about, and that is if we increase the employee share of the insurance, and if those employees, or some of them, decline then to take insurance. If they're younger and healthier and they think they can probably survive a few years or so without having any health insurance and spend that money on something else, many, as they do in the private sector, will do that. The point of the bill is to reduce the number of uninsured, not to increase the number of uninsured. So there is some concern there as to how far that would go. I think there may be some other ways that we're looking at that might help. One is to see whether we could, as an option, include communities or regional districts in the Group Insurance Commission accounts. There's some problems with that because we have different insurances. We don't, for instance, group insurance currently deal with Blue Cross, whereas many of the communities do. But so it might mean taking some different plans if we would go that way. But by being part of a larger pool, we would think we could negotiate with the insurers for somewhat better premium rates. We could look at a reinsurance program for that, and also to kind of keep that within reason. But we are working on looking at the insurance because we know it's a big problem. It's not something that it's not particular to the schools. It's one the schools happen to usually have the most employees in a town, but it's for all of the communities, all the town's employees, and as well. The townspeople of the town of Oxford or any of the towns that are here, over the years, or in some cases the town meeting, or in a few cases the Board of Selectmen have added to those health insurance policies. That's how they go in. The state doesn't impose that health insurance on the communities. Either the town votes it on a ballot vote, the town meeting votes it. I think only in one case, and that was Representative Kajowski and I tried to help the retirees of the town of Webster, which has its own system, to at least get some insurance at 50%. But that was a town meeting vote that we filed for it, so it was a local request that we did it. But these are all, the insurance laws, while they're state laws, are accepted locally. And so we didn't impose that. Somebody agreed to accept that at some point. In the past, I think what they did was the benefits, health benefits weren't that expensive. And communities not wanting to pay large salaries said, well, we'll give them benefits. And then the benefits increased, so and the cost of those benefits increased rather dramatically to the point where the increase is now oftentimes more than a raise that's offered. The third issue, Jen, was?
Healthcare costs.
No, we did that. It was the final issue.
I think there were two questions on healthcare. I think you did address both, Senator. There were actually two main issues, lottery and healthcare.
Okay. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to supplement that or add it, or correct me if I did anything, said anything wrong, but I think that was correct. Senator Brewer, is that right? You want to add a little something
A
to that?
brief comment, because the hour is getting late and we're into it for 2 hours, and I know the statute of limitations on these meetings, but when you do budgets, folks, you can't do isolated topics of budgets as legislators do. We come tonight and we talk about local aid and education aid issues specifically, but I was reading, think about the good things as well. In this Oxford High School, a 20-year note for the infrastructure of a multi-million-dollar high school. Now, I don't know if your note is being paid off this fiscal year, but it will be within the next 2 years. Tantasco Regional High School is paid off in this fiscal year, saving the towns $1 million. And when you do a holistic budget, again, between the year 2001 and 2006, this budget that we're dealing with, there are many aspects of our budget. Higher education remains 30% below what it was in 2001. Our colleges, the university, our state colleges, our community colleges, our investment in economic and business development is 27% below what it was in FY01. Our environmental programs are 28% below what they were for an investment in 2001. And parks and recreation down 40% from what they were in 2001. So as we grapple and try to find the resources, we will not be governed by some gimmickry by pushing Medicaid reimbursements into FY07 that the governor realized $450 million in his budget that we believed was not realistic. Pay your bills when they are due. And so we took that sober analytical analysis. If you don't believe us, believe Standard & Poor's and Moody's, who just upgrade our bond rating again in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So unlike it was in 1989 and 1990, when we were 48th out of 50 states in our bond rating. We faced these very extraordinarily difficult times in these last 2 years. Remember what I said in my opening remarks about the worst fiscal crisis since World War II. We faced them, and we cut taxes 44 times. Cut taxes 44 times. In that period of time. But it hasn't been pleasant. It has not been pleasant for municipal officials, for educators, educational administrators, and for legislators as well. But we are emerging. We are not all the way back, and I'm not so sure because of the dot-com boom that we had in 97, 98, 99, when many advocacy groups were not happy with an 8, 9, or 10% line item increase in a fiscal year. We're not back there, and I doubt if we're going to be back there. And it's going to require a significant amount of restructuring and thinking anew relative to our problems. But it comes back again to the root cause of everything that I see in the greatest degree is this extraordinary cost of health care. An aging population, exploding costs of medicines, and frankly now on energy. Representative Whitney, his comments about the gasoline tax have merit, but people might vote from Dudley with their feet and go to the next town over to buy their gasoline. This legislature, the House earlier this week and the Senate tomorrow, working on a tax-free day on August 13th. We brought $400 million in retail expansion on the slowest business day of the year, last August. The Senate tomorrow will advocate a tax-free weekend, both August 13th and 14th. It'll be subject to conference, I am sure, to do that, but to try to stimulate our economy. The House will continue with efforts almost bi-weekly on economic stimulus plans that we should do and we will go forward to it. Because if you want a bigger piece of the pie, we simply have to make more pies. We can't be adding taxes. The people have spoken to us about raising taxes. Now in Washington, downstairs at the United States Bureau of Engraving, they print money. It's a federal offense for us to do that. We have to deal with the hand that has dealt with us. And oftentimes it is difficult choices and not being all things to all people, all of the time. And that's how responsible government has to be. Thank you.
Okay, Selectman Dan Coonan?
Actually, Frank, I'm going to hold mine on senators, the waiting for the hour.
Okay.
Address my questions. I'll hold mine till the time.
All right, is there anyone else who has a question?
Hey, Frank, can I respond to it?
Sure. You want to respond to the fact that he wants to hold off?
Right, you're going to have to use a nuclear option up here. Oh, that's all right.
Sorry. I'd just like to address the lottery cap. And, you know, I have supported initiatives in the past, and I do believe that we have to speed up the process in lifting that cap. That lottery aid was meant for our local communities. We should keep that promise as soon as possible and get it back to all of you. And I believe under the same type of formula, we should, and I wanted to make it in my opening remarks, and I want to support what my good friend from Webster, Representative Kajowski, said, as well as others, that we should seriously bring casino gambling to Massachusetts and distribute those funds directly to our local communities so that they all can share in that increase, so we don't have to continue to send money to Connecticut, at least in the amounts that we currently are. Thank you.
Right, is there anyone out there that has any questions? Yes, sir. Jim, right? I'd probably have the thing, we still have some people in the back. Thank you.
Joe Perry from the school committee. I could say a lot of things about the mandates and policies and all those, but I have one idea. When we got our high school approved, we got plans approved, and we were sent to the SBAB to get reimbursed starting 12, 15 years down the road, change the whole rule to the Treasury Department, put it on a sales tax. Is that correct?
Yes, to a degree it is. We will phase in.
The same program applied to education funds.
If you did that, is that what you're suggesting?
That's what I was suggesting. It's a consumer tax. It was suggested to put it on gasoline. But one thing Americans, Massachusetts people do is they spend money in the stores. And that's a source of revenue tax. Heavier, you can't make the tax. Just a suggestion.
Of the 5 cents of the dollar that goes to the sales tax, and we're relatively low by comparison to many states, as well as the number of items are exempted, the 1 cent is dedicated to the funding of regional transportation. The MBTA and the regional transit authorities get that cent to help provide, rather than have it come out of the operating budget. The 2nd cent has now been pledged to repayment of the school building costs. We had built up almost a $12 billion liability of buildings already built, this included, and communities, including some here, hoping to seek new buildings at some point or renovations to buildings. We didn't have the money to continue that program, so we instead of making it a budget item, we dedicated the penny of the sales tax. So there are 3 cents left that goes into general fund. So if we dedicate a penny of that to education, I don't think you'd see any more money for education necessarily. I don't think that would increase it. You're just shifting it around. Instead, right now, that money's coming back in education from the general fund. If we dedicate a penny, it's, I think, $700 million roughly a year is what a penny of the sales tax brings in. $700 million is going to pay for local aid. That's into the billions already. So I don't see it as adding to it. If you wanted to add to the sales tax. Now, I suggested, since we found that when the New School and Building Assistance Authority took over and they audited the programs that the Department of Ed had been running on school building, they have come up with a shortfall. They thought the liability was a certain amount. They came up with about $1.5 billion short of what the Department of Ed had thought they owed. So they said, well, maybe we'll have to keep the cap on new buildings for another year or two. That doesn't solve any problem, because only the construction costs keep going up. So when you do have to build, it's just going to be more expensive. And the need for those communities that are overcrowded or whatever is going to continue to grow. I suggested several things rather than having a cap, among them being adding a cent to the sales tax. The Worcester Telegram, both in a cartoon and an editorial, took me over the coals. I was an awful person for even suggesting that we think about paying that deficit with an extra cent of the sales tax. I didn't hear anybody, certainly nobody on the school side or this groups that want to build schools said I had a good idea. So I'm assuming that's not a good idea, since the Telegram said it wasn't and nobody contradicted them. So it's, nobody wants, people, no one, I wrote to, I had letters from Oxford, I had letters from Blackstone and Millville, letters from Sutton, in the multiples, a couple of hundred each about school budgets. In my response, I said, well, would you support and would you advocate in your community to either raise the income tax to back to 5.6? Would you advocate raising the sales tax by a penny, dedicating it to education? Out of probably a total of 700 letters that I wrote and explained that and explained the problems of the budget, I had one letter back saying they would do that, they would support that. Even people that want to spend the money don't want to take it out of their pocket. So, there is a problem there in society about people wanting to have more things but not wanting to pay for it.
Somehow the pie has to get bigger.
Well, but that means, the public keeps telling us, I don't agree with them, but the public keeps telling us that we're not going to pay any more. They want cuts, they don't want more taxes. And, they almost repealed the state income tax, the major source of state revenue, 3 years ago. So, raising taxes is not an easy thing to do, even if you had a governor who was willing to support that, and we don't have one right now.
The sad part, it was me that wrote that one letter supporting the 1% of sales tax. So it's not going too far. Not really true, but is there anyone else who'd like to ask any questions? Yes, sir. We are going to stick right on our time schedule. If there are any questions, we will not start them after 9:25.
Good evening. I'm Roger Lister, Chairman of the Town Council of Southbridge. I hope you don't mind that I crashed the party tonight, but I heard about it and I thought it was important to be here since the senator that represents us and the representative that represents us was here, so I joined in. A couple of years ago, in this very building, I believe, Senator Moore held a discussion similar to this, talk about the type of cuts that were being made and how they were going to be made. And in that, he defined the budget as you really have two sides to it, fixed costs and unfixed costs, with the fixed costs having the state police and Medicare and pensions and local aid and stuff like that, and then fixed costs being programs and that type of stuff. The discussion then went to all the cuts that were going to be happening to the fixed cost side, which seemed odd to me. Because it would seem to me that the unfixed side is the side that you would want to cut from. Programs are wonderful. However, the best government is local government. If you are able to give more locally to the community, and have the community determine what the best use of the funds are to directly and personally impact their citizenship, that's the best method. And then, I don't want to go too deep into that, but the other piece, the gentleman over here spoke of earlier, the universal special ed is what he called it. The other type of centralized pieces. Everyone knows what's going on in my community with our school system right now. We're on the front page every day. And last night we had the state's Department of Education's curriculum advisor who's been working with us to develop our curriculum in our school system. And she was asked the question of, why is it taking so long? There must be curriculum in other communities already being used. And what we were told was, the process has to be followed through. The process is more important than the product. And so instead of us coming to Dudley Charlton, which has the best MCAS scores in the area, and saying, what's your curriculum, and putting it in place, what we've done is we're going to try to rewrite the book. So one of the ways that can save costs for the local municipalities and for the state is to have centralized information that can be used by everyone. I just want to stress again, local government is the best form of government. People have a direct say, people have a direct impact on everything that happens there. They can see it. I'm fairly informed about political issues throughout the state, but I don't think that I can tell you how my elected officials voted on two-thirds of their votes, because there's too much that goes on and you don't have time to read. Whereas I bet the people of Southbridge can tell you how I voted on two-thirds of my votes. Thank you.
Again, I just wanted to touch on this. I spent 7 years as a town selectman. I stayed up all night long the night of Proposition 2.5 in 1980, some 25 years ago. And the cap on property taxes has made governing incredibly difficult. Try paying the property taxes, though. That's even more difficult to a great degree. It's really a big challenge. So then you go down 75 miles east and you work in Boston and you realize the line item for the agency of the Department of Mental Retardation, our fellow citizens who are retarded, that costs $1 billion a year out of that budget. Department of Mental Health, people who are mentally ill that need our helping hand and our guidance. They're human beings. They're ours. That's $1 billion. A $24 billion state budget, 50% of it now, $11 billion of it, is about helping human beings, which is the statewide responsibility, either legally and certainly morally. We have Massachusetts highway system, that is the state's responsibility. We have debt service on many of our obligations, a state's responsibility. The pensions for everybody who is still alive that used to work in state government that is entitled to a pension. We're not going to pull a Raytheon on our pensioners. We're not going to pull the rug out from under them, and we're not going to rip them off, and we're not going to betray the honor of their service to us. The buildings, the infrastructure, School Building Assistance Authority. Last year, the debt service on that was $400 million. 4 years before, it was $200 million, because our towns have sweat blood to build these schools for our kids. We're not going to renege on that. Our Regional Transit Authority, as well as the Boston Regional Transit Authority, is our responsibility. Frankly, the other line items that the state has spent on state government, as we call it, 1.3%. Significantly less than the rate of inflation. That is the truth. And where we sweat blood and we try to do the best, and Representative Kajolski said it well, because it was a man who seems to be vilified now, but Tom Finneran, who put money away for a rainy day. Since 1840, our economy in this nation has expanded and contracted like an accordion, sometimes in long cycles of 10 years of expansion, sometimes 2 years, and then it contracts. And it was Speaker Finneran who said, we will put it away so we don't have to raise your taxes. And we can also continue to honor the cut in taxes after those planes hit the World Trade Center, causing a worldwide, a global catastrophic economic meltdown, depressing our third largest tax revenue in this Commonwealth to international tourism, and so many other things. We had to deal with the hand that was dealt to us, and I think we did it very, very responsibly. And I have been in Southbridge on many occasions, and I think you've got a great town, and I think it's got great potential, and I think the days will be bright when you weather through this storm, and if we can collectively partner with you to do that, we intend to do that as well. Thank you.
With all due respect, and to the previous speaker who asked the question, Senator Moore gave the statistics of what all of the cities and towns receive. Every one of those is going to look at Southbridge and say to us, why can't we get as much as Southbridge? And that, and that's been a subject of criticism to the reps and the senators for the rest of the towns and the districts. And you usually are a focal point as to why we can't or what the inconsistency is with the formula, and that's exactly why we're here tonight, and to discuss the reasons why other towns can't get the type of revenues that you do get. And in fiscal year 2005, you received 14,526, almost 900, whatever, 14.5 million, and then in lottery funds, you received an additional 3 million. And with those figures, and I think to the contrary of what you're saying, a lot of the problems that you seem to have go back to the management of the systems, and we don't really tell school systems how to run their own systems. There are mandated programs, but again, your systems have the ability to run the programs as they may and as they have to. Your population's far different than probably a lot of the towns that are here too, and your needs are different, and that's why you do get more funding with regards to that. And probably in a lot of cases, and it was mind-boggling to me reading why you were having the problems that you do have, and it becomes an obvious fact that the class sizes have got to, or the individual attention of the class sizes had to been reduced to, so small or such staggering figures that obviously it came to a head. So there is a situation where we as officials from the state say, okay, what we give to you as, or what we can try to allocate for you or fight for you for, you have to make the most of and be responsible for those figures. And that's again a difficult task for us to try to achieve, because you have no idea how many times that those figures are being thrown in our faces saying, hey, we don't get what Southbridge gets, why don't we? And it's tough for us to answer that. And we have to come up with those, the reasons, and it's not easy.
Okay, I think we've got time for just one. Anybody has one quick question? You've already spoken, sir. Try this gentleman. This will be the last question.
Probably shouldn't say anything because it will affect me on the job tomorrow, but Ms. Casey, I can't sit here. I do feel your frustration every time we prepare a budget. I only have one question to the General Counsel here tonight. When will they honor their commitment to lower the income tax to what it's supposed to be? The great state of the handouts continues to go for tax-free weekends, days, holidays, whatever. I've been through 2 amnesty programs on my job. I've seen a tax-free day. Now you're advocating another tax-free day to all the people, most of them who don't even work or pay any taxes to this greater Commonwealth, can go and buy something on my handouts that I give them. When will you honor your commitment, or our commitment, to the public that voted to reduce the tax? On $2,000, you can save about $100. 70% of your income in this Commonwealth is drawn from personal income tax. And if every one of them got the reduction in the personal income tax, you'd have a lot more money to spend than the $100 we're going to give on a tax-free day.
Anyone want to respond? There's no response request. Mark?
Not to lose everything on it. There was a difference in vote, both from the public and then trying to administer and keep solvent, a budget here in the state. It is on a schedule based on triggers. It may not be to the accelerated to the extent everybody would wish it is, but nonetheless, there is a formula in place to roll it back, and we are honoring that. One of the things I just wanted to bring to the table is, when we talk about taxes and taxation, you brought the tax-free day. I mean, I think there's still some work for us to do on equity issues, on taxes, whether it be sales tax or what have you. The senator a couple years ago, and I applaud him for it, and I still support the idea, is, we don't treat all businesses the same. They may sell the same item, but if you sell it over the internet, forget it. But if you sell it here, if you made a commitment, put it in bricks and mortar in a store, employ a couple of people, you got to pay the tax. There's got to be some equity there, and I think we're losing, and the time to try to wean the e-commerce into everyday American life, I think, is expired. Well, I think we're here. I think we all know the convenience of it, and we should tax it equitably like everything else. And I would also, in this age of some of the issues that we face and fund, a lot of that is health care due to bad nutritional choices. I think some of the exemptions that we also talked about today probably need to be looked at. Food is one thing, but there are certain categories within food that are deemed necessary, probably beneficial, nutritional, and so on. But I got to tell you, I think my diet of Twinkies and Yo-Hos probably doesn't qualify, and I should probably help fund the detriment that I'm causing to myself, so it's not a burden on anybody else. But I mean, I say that in jest, but I think there are other examples like that that we could look at. And then one last thing that I think that because Jim was so good to bring up, share his idea with the gas tax, and I'm not so sure where I am on that, but and where the details may even fledge out if there is a proposal. But one of the things that we have found out in Massachusetts through studies over the course of the last 7 or 8 years is that on special fuels, our transportation industry, tractor trailers, those who deliver our goods back and forth, they have a great capacity to hold fuel. And I only know this because I was in the business. And I would tell my guys back before I had any, I was so idealistic, is you fill up those trucks in New York, you fill up in New Hampshire, you fill up in Connecticut. If I ever see a sales receipt that you filled up to any great extent here in Massachusetts, except just to get home, then we've got issues. Special fuels, I think, is an area where we actually are sacrificing sales to other states because we are a little more punitive. But when you talk about hundreds of gallons of gas there, we see those sales being derived in our neighboring states, not here. And I think there's something else we should take a look at. If we can reduce, at the same time, recognize more revenue coming in, and I think we've won on a number of occasions. In with that bill, by the way, was also some tax exemption on heavy equipment purchases. Again, hoping to stimulate those types of sales, those high-ticket sales here in the Commonwealth, and not over the borders.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mark. Okay, Jen, you have a few closing words for us?
And just briefly, the hour is late. I want to thank everybody for coming this evening, and again, thank my colleagues for putting this on. I too hope to see everybody in September for those educational hearings that will be hosted here. I want to thank our reps and senators for coming out this evening, and again, in the coming weeks and months, if you are happening to pick up a Southbridge Evening News or a local paper, the Oxford Shopper, and you may read something that you don't agree with, or you think that we're being too brass down in the trenches here. You have to understand, and I'm sure you do, many have served on local boards, that it is down here in the trenches, and we don't try to be everything to everyone, but day in and day out, we deal with the people directly, and you are our outlet and our resource. So, give us a little flexibility, a little leeway when you read those local papers. We know that you are working hard. In closing, I just want to say that it was a beautiful July night, and everybody who took the time to be here tonight, it really is indicative of your devotion to your towns, with the school committee, board of selectmen, and I encourage all of you to continue the discussions, the ideas, contact the gentleman on the stage or your other reps and senators, and there were some good ideas raised tonight. Don't let them die. I thought the suggestion of a lottery ticket specifically earmarked for education was an interesting idea that committee chair Ennis raised, and also some of the other ideas that were raised as far as I believe it was regionalization of special needs spending and those types of initiatives. So I encourage everybody to continue working with our reps and senators. It's an ongoing process. We don't go home tonight and all the problems are solved, and we just have to keep working at it. So I thank you all for coming, and hopefully you can make it in September. And if anybody wants to reach out to our board for any ideas or comments or what have you, we're available. Thank you.